June 4, 1942. During the Aleutian diversion of Midway, Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga's Mitsubishi A6M20 took flak over Dutch Harbour and force-landed on Akutan Island. The aircraft flipped, killing Koga, yet remained largely intact in the bog. For more than a month it lay hidden in fog and tundra until a US PBY patrol sighted the wreck on July 10th. Salvage crews pried the fighter from the mud, ferried it south, and guarded it like a crown jewel. In San Diego, Navy engineers straightened, bent spars, trued the prop, and restored the airframe with minimal fabrication. On September 20th, at Naval Air Station North Island, Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders advanced the throttle on a Japanese Zero, now wearing American stars, and lifted into clear California air. Over the next 25 days, he flew 24 evaluation sorties, pushing the captured fighter through climbs, dives, and rolling maneuvers. The data overturned myth with measurement. Superb low-speed agility, yes, but dangerous control stiffening at higher speeds, fragile structure in steep dives, no pilot armor, and non-self-sealing tanks. The invincible Zero had precise limits. Intelligence distilled the findings into tactics and training circulars sent across the Pacific. American pilots were told to refuse turning contests, use slashing dives, and coordinate mutual support. The aura of untouchability began to crack wherever U.S. fighters could trade altitude for speed. Japanese engineers would later hear that the Americans had recovered, rebuilt, and flight-tested their masterpiece within weeks, and balked at the timeline. Yet the logs, parts lists, and test cards existed, and they changed the air war. According to one Japanese assessment, acquiring this single aircraft was a blow no less serious than a major defeat. The Zero had yielded its secrets to disciplined curiosity. From one wrecked fighter, an empire's aura began to fade fast. In 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service entered the Pacific War, convinced its Mitsubishi A6M0 represented an unassailable edge. Designed by Jiro Horikoshi at Mitsubishi's Nagoya works, the A6M2 Model 21 weighed barely 5,300 pounds. Loaded yet could range over 1,900 miles, nearly double that of its Allied rivals. Its Sakai 12 engine delivered 940 horsepower, giving climb rates exceeding 3,100 feet per minute, and blistering turn performance unmatched by American or British fighters. From China to the Philippines and down through the Dutch East Indies, Zeros carved the sky into what pilots called the Empire Zone. Between December 1941 and May 1942, official Navy tallies credited Zero units with destroying more than 1,000 enemy aircraft for fewer than 50 losses. Allied communiques admitted a technical superiority of the Japanese fighter. In Manila, Lieutenant Commander Paul H. Ramsey wrote that their planes could turn inside a dime. At Kure Arsenal, engineers issued a December 1941 bulletin boasting, "Our light structure and long-range design secure mastery for years to come." This confidence radiated upward. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome of the Combined Fleet Staff briefed Emperor Hirohito that the Navy fighter has no equal in the Western world. Japanese doctrine emphasized aggressive dogfighting, relying on the Zero's ultralight frame and unmatched maneuverability. Aircrews trained to engage in horizontal circles where heavier Allied aircraft would stall or spin out. American intelligence struggled to penetrate the mystique. Pre-war reports from the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence listed the Zero only as a Type 00 carrier fighter, limited data available. The absence of wreckage or captured specimens left analysts guessing at performance. As late as spring 1942, Oni estimated the Zero's top speed at only 310 mph, well below reality. Such underestimation flattered Japan's sense of invulnerability. In Tokyo, newspapers proclaimed, "Our pilots hold the heavens." Yet within months, a single crash on a fog-bound Aleutian island would expose the peril behind that pride. The aircraft Japanese designers deemed uncrackable would soon sit disassembled under American fluorescent lights, its secrets spilling out bolt by bolt. While Japanese planners recorded another string of victories, declassified Navy memoranda show that across the Pacific, American engineers were quietly preparing to dismantle their illusion of invincibility. By early 1942, the United States faced a nightmare in the Pacific skies. The Zero had swept aside every Allied fighter from the Philippines to Java, leaving American pilots flying machines that felt obsolete before they left the runway. The Grumman F-4F Wildcat, the Navy's principal carrier fighter, was rugged but slow. It climbed sluggishly, turned poorly, and could barely keep the Japanese aircraft in sight. Reports from the Coral Sea and Java Sea read like laments, pilots describing Zeros that appeared from nowhere and vanished upward like ghosts. The Bureau of Aeronautics compiled those dispatches into an April 1942 memorandum admitting the truth. Enemy performance exceeds all current Navy types. There was frustration and disbelief. In Washington, engineers lacked even basic measurements of the Zero's wingspan or engine type. Intelligence officers could only sketch vague silhouettes from scattered photographs. Public morale trembled under newspaper headlines proclaiming Japan's superplane dominates Pacific. Allied pilots, outnumbered and outflown, resorted to desperate dives to escape combat. Naval historian Samuel Eliot Morison later summarized that grim season. The Wildcat could endure punishment, but it could not choose the fight. Behind the scenes, a handful of officers searched for a breakthrough. Commander Frederick M. Trapnell, head of Navy flight testing, urged headquarters to locate an intact enemy aircraft. Without one, every countermeasure was guesswork. At the same time, American factories strained under war demands. Redesigning a fighter from scratch would take years. Then, fate intervened. Reports arrived from the remote Aleutian Islands. An enemy fighter had crashed almost intact on Akutan. The recovery team's coded telegram described it simply as one Japanese single-engine fighter in excellent condition. When the battered Zero reached the dockyards of San Diego, the mood shifted. For the first time, engineers had something real to study, a tangible enemy born of aluminum and precision. Within those crumpled wings and cracked panels lay the answers America had been searching for. According to naval test pilot Eddie Sanders, it was like finding the Rosetta Stone of the Pacific Air War. The impossible suddenly looked solvable. But possession was only the beginning. What American engineers did next would astonish even Japan's most brilliant designers. The captured Zero arrived at Naval Air Station North Island under armed guard in mid-July 1942, its fabric-covered control surfaces shredded, its propeller bent, its airframe caked with Alaskan mud. For the engineers who gathered around it, Commander Frederick M. Trapnell, Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders, and a hand-picked team from the Bureau of Aeronautics, it was a miracle of preservation. They logged each dent, photographed every joint, and began a methodical disassembly that filled hundreds of pages of technical notes. Declassified Navy records show they worked in shifts around the clock, determined to unlock the aircraft's secrets before Japan could change the design. The first revelation was structural. The Zero's aluminum skin measured barely 0.3 of a millimeter thick, astonishingly light. Rivet spacing was irregular, suggesting hand craftsmanship rather than factory automation. The wings used a single main spar, saving weight but sacrificing rigidity at high speed. Its 940 horsepower Nakajima Sakai 12 engine was compact, air-cooled, and superbly tuned for low-speed efficiency, yet starved for power above 18,000 feet. Sanders noted in his engineering diary, "A plane of genius design, until speed becomes its enemy." the Americans rebuilt the fighter using original components wherever possible. Replacement parts were fabricated from the Navy's aluminum stocks, and instruments were recalibrated in English units. Within 6 weeks, the Akutan Zero stood on its wheels, bearing a fresh coat of olive drab and a white star insignia. On September 20th, 1942, Sanders lifted it from the runway. The flight confirmed both the legend and the flaw. The Zero could turn inside anything in the sky, but became heavy and unstable beyond 250 knots. Diving tests exposed critical compressibility limits. Those results flowed directly into new tactics. Naval Training Bulletin 43 Wendell 1 advised pilots to avoid turning duels and instead use energy tactics, steep dives followed by zoom climbs. Engineers at Grumman and Vought incorporated the data into the upcoming F-6F Hellcat and F-4U Corsair, reinforcing spars and control surfaces to exploit the Japanese fighters' weaknesses. Trapnell later wrote that the Akutan analysis gave us our first real weapon against the Zero, not a new airplane, but understanding. Behind locked hangar doors, America had transformed intelligence into innovation. By October 1942, the Bureau of Aeronautics issued its confidential report, Examination and Test of Japanese Fighter Type Zero, concluding, "Speed defeats agility." It was a phrase that would soon define the skies over the Pacific. As American engineers decoded every secret rivet, intercepted reports showed Japanese command still believed their fighter unassailable, unaware that its blueprint now lived in American hands. By late August 1942, the reconstructed Zero, now designated Technical Air Intelligence Center Aircraft No. 1, stood ready on the sun-bleached tarmac at North Island, San Diego. Every component had been catalogued, measured and diagrammed. Blueprints stretched across drafting tables like treasure maps. Engineers from Grumman, Vought and Lockheed visited under armed escort, each sworn to secrecy. Their brief was clear: study every advantage, copy nothing, learn everything. The Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics tracked the project in daily memos, marking progress with terse precision. Fuselage alignment complete, wing incidents verified, propeller repaired. The entire operation remained off official rosters. Hidden beneath the innocuous codename Sample 21, weather logs show clear skies through early September, ideal for the test flights that would follow. Sanders and Commander Trapnell rehearsed procedures in the hangar, checking control cables and refitted gauges. At dawn, they taxied the Zero across the field, while guards turned their backs to prevent photographs. Witnesses recalled an uncanny silence as the Japanese aircraft idled beneath the American flag. Lieutenant Floyd L. Allen, who observed the preparation, later remarked, "It felt as though history was holding its breath." At the same time, Navy instructors at Pensacola began revising pilot syllabi based on preliminary findings. Training bulletins warned, "Do not engage in horizontal turns. Use vertical maneuvers. Outdive him, he cannot follow." In Washington, strategists compiled those lessons into what would become Tactical Circular No. 29, distributing it to carrier groups in the South Pacific before the year's end. Every detail of the Aleutian discovery had been classified beyond top secret. Even within the Navy, only a handful knew the truth. To the outside world, the Akutan Zero didn't exist. Inside the test hangar, however, technicians were already comparing its stress tolerances with prototypes of the F-6F Hellcat, adjusting wing geometry and control balance according to the captured fighter's weaknesses. It was an extraordinary reversal. The same meticulous craftsmanship that once symbolized Japan's aerial superiority was now guiding America's next generation of fighters. The stage was set. An enemy masterpiece, reborn in U.S. colors, waited for the signal to take flight. On September 20th, 1942, as dawn broke over North Island, the hangar doors slid open, and for the first time, an American pilot prepared to fly Japan's greatest weapon. On the cool morning of September 20th, 1942, Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders climbed into the cockpit of the restored Zero. Mechanics cleared the chocks as the Nakajima Sakai engine barked to life, coughing blue smoke before settling into a silky hum. The aircraft taxied toward runway 27, its olive-drab skin glinting beneath the California sun. In the control tower, Commander Frederick Trapnell watched silently through binoculars. For months, the Japanese had ruled the Pacific skies with this very machine. Now, for the first time, it would fly for the United States. Sanders eased forward the throttle. The Zero accelerated quickly, leaping from the runway after only 350 feet of roll. Moments later, it banked gently over the bay, its rising silhouette reflecting in the water below. Technicians timed every maneuver with stopwatches. The aircraft reached 10,000 feet in barely 4 minutes, matching Japanese performance claims almost exactly. "She flies like a dream," Sanders recorded in his logbook, "but feels fragile, as though speed itself could tear her apart." Over the next 3 weeks, Sanders flew 24 test sorties. The results were revelatory. At low speeds, the Zero turned within an astonishing radius, under 600 feet. Yet above 250 knots, the controls stiffened alarmingly. Beyond 300 knots, the airframe began to vibrate, signaling structural strain. Without armor or self-sealing tanks, the slightest burst from a .50 caliber machine gun could ignite its fuel. Sanders described a dive test that ended just short of disaster when the wings began to flutter violently. "Brilliance balanced on the edge of fragility," he wrote. These reports went directly to the Bureau of Aeronautics and the newly formed Technical Air Intelligence Center, which converted Sanders' findings into combat doctrine. The phrase "never dogfight a Zero" entered Navy vocabulary. Instead, American pilots were instructed to exploit their heavier aircraft's superior dive speed and rugged construction. Out of these lessons emerged the Thatch Weave, developed by Commander Jimmy Thatch, a defensive formation allowing 2 Wildcats to cover each other and strike from superior angles. Barely a month later, during the Battle of Santa Cruz Islands, Thatch's tactics and the insights from the Akutan Zero converged in deadly effect. American pilots outmaneuvered Japanese formations, diving through their turns and climbing out of reach. Dozens of Zeros were downed in engagements where U.S. losses were minimal. The myth of invincibility, once so tightly woven into Japanese pride, was unraveling fast. When the last test flight concluded on October 15th, Sanders taxied the Zero back into its hangar. The aircraft was no longer an enemy relic, but a teacher, a fragile professor of aeronautics that had schooled an entire nation in the art of adaptation. Trapnell later summarized the moment best. "The Zero showed us that even perfection has weak seams. Once we saw them, the balance of the Pacific tilted. In Tokyo, Japanese engineers would soon learn of the impossible, a complete American reconstruction of their prized fighter, and refused to believe it. When news filtered through Japan's military intelligence, circles that the Americans had not only captured, but flown a Zero fighter, disbelief rippled through engineering bureaus and naval commands alike. The reports, first intercepted from Allied broadcasts and later confirmed by prisoners of war, claimed that the U.S. Navy had dismantled, studied and test-flown the aircraft in mere weeks. Inside Mitsubishi's Nagoya design office, Chief Engineer Jiro Horikoshi dismissed the rumor outright. "No one could master its systems so quickly," he told colleagues. "They lacked the craftsman's touch." To him, the Zero embodied not just machinery, but spirit, an extension of Japan's disciplined precision. Captured documents after the war reveal that Tokyo ordered an internal inquiry through the Kura Naval Arsenal in late 1942. Investigators found nothing, assuming the reports to be Allied propaganda meant to undermine morale. Yet on the front lines, evidence mounted. American pilots now dove with uncanny confidence, breaking engagements at will and exploiting the Zero's weaknesses. Squadron leaders at Rabaul and Buin sent urgent requests for heavier models with armored tanks. Their messages carried a new tone of anxiety. Enemy tactics demonstrate intimate knowledge of our machine. By early 1943, the psychological tide had shifted. Japan's once dominant fighter squadrons were losing aircraft faster than replacements could arrive. At the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, Allied pilots used speed and altitude to devastating effect. Confirming what Sanders' tests had shown months earlier, the Zero could not survive a high-speed vertical fight. When Horikoshi learned the truth after Japan's surrender, he reportedly stared at a photograph of the recovered plane, tail code V173, and murmured, "So it was real." In his post-war memoir, he conceded, "They understood it because they respected it." The irony was bitter. America's mastery had been achieved through study, not imitation. In interrogation rooms across Yokosuka and Atsugi, former officers listened in disbelief as U.S. investigators recounted the Akutan recovery step by step. One prisoner summed up their astonishment with a resigned whisper, "You flew it in 6 weeks?" Then we were already defeated. Even as Japan struggled to comprehend the loss of its aerial advantage, American engineers were already applying their findings to a new generation of fighters that would dominate every sky they entered. The lessons drawn from the Akutan Zero reshaped the Pacific Air War with astonishing speed. By early 1943, the findings from Sanders' test flights had filtered through every level of U.S. naval aviation. Tactical bulletins circulated to carrier groups under the heading "Fighting the Japanese Zero, Lessons from Captured Aircraft." The instructions were concise. Never turn horizontally, never climb beneath him, strike from above, dive away. Those few lines of doctrine became gospel for Navy and Marine pilots across the Pacific. The data also reached American industry. Engineers at Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation, then developing the F-6F Hellcat, pored over the Bureau of Aeronautics technical report. Comparing the Zero's light construction to their own prototypes, they reinforced spars, thickened skin panels, and widened the wingspan for better control in dives. The result was an aircraft that matched the Zero's agility but could outclimb and outdive it decisively. Production memos from Grumman's Bethpage plant noted, "Modifications derived from TAIC analysis, Zero sample. By mid-1943, the EI first Hellcats rolled off the line, embodying every lesson the Akutan wreck had taught. Combat reports soon proved the transformation. During the Solomon Islands campaign, Hellcats achieved kill ratios of up to 19-1 against Zeros. The light, unarmored Japanese fighter that once terrorized Allied pilots now burned across Pacific skies by the hundreds. In the span of a single year, America had turned knowledge into supremacy. Publicly, little was said. The Akutan recovery remained classified until after the war, known only to a circle of officers and engineers, but inside naval briefings, its significance was celebrated as one of the most valuable intelligence coups of the conflict. Admiral Thomas Kincaid, commanding the North Pacific Force, called it a victory of intellect over machinery. The psychological impact was equally profound. The Zero, once a symbol of Japanese invincibility, became a reminder of vulnerability. Allied pilots no longer fought with dread, they fought with understanding. By 1944, American aircraft dominated every front from the Marshalls to the Marianas. The balance that had once tilted toward Japan now rested firmly on the wings of insight drawn from a single crash in the Alaskan tundra. Historians would later call the Akutan Zero the most valuable wreck in aviation history, its legacy reaching far beyond the battles it helped to win. In the decades since the war, historians have come to view the Akutan Zero not simply as a captured machine, but as a turning point in the history of aerial warfare. The event proved that victory often depends less on invention than on understanding. When the United States recovered that single aircraft in 1942, it unwittingly founded a new discipline, technical intelligence exploitation, that would define modern military science for generations. Academic studies at the Naval Postgraduate School and the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School now trace the lineage of their analysis programs directly to the Akutan investigation. The detailed engineering notebooks kept by Trapnell and Sanders became templates for post-war aircraft evaluation manuals. The Navy's Technical Air Intelligence Center evolved into the Foreign Material Exploitation Division, which later examined captured MiG fighters in Korea, Soviet missiles in Vietnam, and Iraqi aircraft during Desert Storm. Every operation that turned enemy technology into American advantage began with that Alaskan salvage in 1942. The Zero also transformed the relationship between art and engineering. Jiro Horikoshi's design had represented a triumph of craftsmanship, light, elegant, and daringly minimalist. American engineers, in dissecting it, learned not only about its weaknesses, but about the creative philosophy behind it. Trapnell later reflected, "It was not imitation we pursued, but comprehension." That attitude became the foundation of post-war aerospace innovation, inspiring the flexible design principles that guided jet development in the 1950s. Today, the restored fragments of the Akutan Zero are preserved at the National Museum of Naval Aviation in Pensacola and the Alaska Aviation Heritage Museum. Visitors read the plaque that calls it "The Plane That Taught Us How to Fight Back." Each rivet and control cable tells the story of a contest between two kinds of genius, one that builds and one that understands. Even in Japan, the episode is remembered with reluctant admiration. In 1978, the Mitsubishi Aircraft Historical Association published a paper acknowledging the Americans' achievement. They treated our creation with respect, and in doing so, mastered it. Horikoshi himself would later write, "To be studied so closely by one's enemy is a strange form of honor." The Akutan Zero stands therefore not merely as an artifact of war, but as a testament to the power of curiosity and intellect in the face of adversity. From that lonely island in Alaska emerged a truth still taught in flight schools around the world. Knowledge, once captured, cannot be defeated. And as historians look back on that moment of discovery, they see not just a wreck in the tundra, but the birth of a doctrine that changed the way nations wage war. The story of the Akutan Zero is more than an account of salvaged metal and reverse engineering. It is a lesson in how intellect reshapes destiny. In June 1942, Japan possessed the finest fighter in the world, crafted with artistry and daring. By October of that same year, America had not only uncovered its secrets, but transformed them into strategy, technology, and victory. The episode stands as proof that understanding an enemy's creation can be more powerful than destroying it. When Lieutenant Commander Eddie Sanders eased the Zero back onto the North Island runway after his final test flight, the aircraft's engine coughed to a stop. But its legacy had just begun. From its fragile wings came doctrines, tactics, and designs that would guide every subsequent American fighter program. The triumph was not one of brute strength, but of disciplined observation, an engineer's victory. After the war, Sanders summarized it simply: "We learned the enemy's mind by listening to his machine." His words echoed through generations of pilots and designers. The intelligence gained from the Akutan Zero shortened the conflict, saved countless lives, and demonstrated that mastery begins with curiosity. Even today, in a world of stealth jets and digital avionics, that principle endures. At museums in Tuatitsit, Alaska and Pensacola, visitors still stand before the remnants of the captured aircraft, its cracked canopy, its faded Hinamaru insignia, and realize that this was the moment when the tide of the Pacific began to turn. From one crash in a fog-shrouded valley emerged a victory of reason over arrogance, of method over myth. The Akutan Zero reminds us that progress is born from the courage to learn, even from one's adversary. Knowledge remains the most decisive weapon of all. Call to action. History is not only what nations build, but what they discover. If stories like this inspire you to see the human genius behind war's machinery, subscribe to Echoes of War, where the forgotten victories, hidden laboratories, and moments of revelation that changed our world come back to life.